The state is a fiercely competitive and ruthless society.
And now, After Hours with Rixx Javix.
We are coming to you from high above Ishmaelkin 5 in the Stay Frosty Lounge. Light a cigar, grab a cold drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk. All right, so this is Rixx, and I'm with David Perry, who you might better know in the EVE community as CrazyKinux. Years and years ago, Crazy had his own blog, and it was known as the BlogFather, and he inspired me to get started in blogging, so you can blame him for all the tomfoolery and shenanigans that have been going on over the years at Evaganda. So I'm very, very honored and pleased to have him as my guest today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I was really happy to partake in this new podcasting adventure that you're taking on. It reminds me of the good old days of the EVE blogging podcasting community. So here we are, 2016. I guess 8 years after my heydays as an EVE blogger. 2008 through 2010, 11 was really.
Yeah, when did you kind of officially step away from?
So actually, I started blogging back in 2005. So
wow.
A long time ago. Actually, my first blog was HTML coded. I wasn't using a blogging platform. Blogger wasn't around, or I didn't know about it anyways. And it was about. It was actually done for a project at. I was taking a night class at McGill University here in Montreal, and it was for an e-commerce class. And I did a blog on. I don't know if you know the game Heavy Gear.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I remember Heavy Gear.
Yeah. So before it, became kind of a tactical tabletop game, it was more of an RPG type of game, and I still have a ton of books, a shitload of books on that. And anyway, so I moved on to blogging about MMOs, which got me into EVE, and that really started kicking into high gear. I guess 2008 is when things really started to pick up. I was actually in between jobs when we were doing the Drone Bay podcast with Croven and what's Al Cedric.
Oh wow! I remember that. I remember that podcast. Absolutely.
Yeah. That was so. Those were the big days. That's when I started to do the blog banter, the EVE blog banter, which really started going in those days. And the reason was quite simple. I was an EVE player. There were a few blogs I was trying to get trying to get some conversations going online. Blogs were big back then. Twitter wasn't really being used a lot. So kind of thought of gathering everybody together. Did the blog pack, started that list, and that really, at one point, I think we had the list, and there were several people, including myself, keeping track or trying to keep track of all the EVE blogs, and I think we were in the several, like in the 500s or 600 blogs. So very different from today. I guess today Twitter has taken a lot of the conversation away from blogs, and there's a lot less happening. To be honest, I'm not really into the EVE blogging scene these days. Busy with a bunch of things, so you probably know a bit more about where we are and what the situation is. And because I remember getting a couple of emails late last year about the latest edition of the EVE blog banters,
right.
And that seems to have died down. So actually, you could probably tell me where we are right now.
Well, I remember back when you were first starting to talk about retiring and closing down the musing site, and we discussed the moving of the blog band or the
blog pack. Yeah.
The blog pack, yeah, right to it, and there were, literally hundreds of blogs that were a part of that, and the list on. I know there was another site that was just keeping link list of all the blogs as they would come up from their RSS feeds, and that was in the 600s.
That was crazy, yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy, and most of those are gone now. or at least they're still there, of course, but they're not being updated regularly. So, yeah, the expansion of social media has had a direct impact, I believe, on the blogging community per se. But on the other hand, and this is kind of an interesting phenomenon that we've seen over the last 5 years, the Eve community itself has expanded in ways that I think that we would have been surprised about back in 2008. I think it's probably there's more communication. The original goal, as you stated, was to get everyone talking and to build an intertwined sort of networked community around Eve.
Exactly.
And I think that while we were probably focused on that as from a blogging standpoint, I think blogging is just one of the cornerstones of that community today. It's actually more networked and there's more communication going on now than ever before.
Good, because I remember that. The thing is that way back then, you have to also remember that in terms of community-driven efforts by CCP, not much was being done except for having just a list of some sites that were blogs that were focused on fan sites,
right?
And that was it. So nothing was being done. Whereas today and since then, they've really basically we started when I say we, I mean myself, you, and a bunch of all the other Eve bloggers started this conversation, and they kind of realized that there was an opportunity to basically grow the community stronger, and they've done lots since then. In creating places for that conversation to happen, for better corporation management, and that got people into a different sort of a different lounge than blogging per se and exchanging on blogs, and I guess it's a normal evolution of where this community was going, and just to go back to your question, because I just realized I didn't answer your question, but. The main reason why I stopped blogging on CrazyKinux was that I actually joined a gaming developer myself.
Oh, okay.
And so in July 2011 is when I stopped blogging, because I couldn't basically have a blog on talking about the merits of one game developer while working for another and trying to sell games and game development.
Right.
It was a bit of a conflict of interest, basically.
Exactly. Right. Well, that totally makes sense, right?
So CrazyKinux kind of faded. CrazyKinux music kind of faded after that, and I've actually tried to restart the blog on numerous occasions over the last 2 years, but same as a lot of people, my focus on exchanging with the internet digerati is basically on Twitter, and that's where most of my conversation these days is happening. And it's a lot less focused on Eve, because I don't have the time to invest in one specific game, and it's kind of funny because if you go back to 2008, 2010, I would not have believed that I could have that sort of thoughts.
Right.
I was thinking that I'd always be playing Eve and always being part of the community, and here we are 8 years, almost 10 years later, and I'm still keeping track here and there, and still enjoy getting news and seeing what's happening. But right now with real life kids and my job, because I'm now a consultant. And actually, that's kind of the interesting story behind all this, is that all through these years of blogging and being part of the Eve community, I was working more as a biz dev, sales, roles in.
Oh, okay. All right.
In the digital space,
right.
And that kind of that whole Eve blogging and community investment and management and architecture, whatever you want to call it, but this whole social media thing, I kind of fell into that deep pit and never came out of it, and that grew into something where, these days I'm actually offering my services professionally, using the skills that I've learned in community management and whatnot. So it's kind of funny that it's evolved into that.
Right. I think that, any of us, I can't speak for everyone, but I know for myself personally, just being a part of the Eve community and operating on Twitter and blogging every day and being on Slack and being, part of that conversation on a daily basis, it kind of forces you to, and not force in a bad way, but you kind of have to, become a master of that tool, learning your way around social media and what can be expected and what can be done with each of those tools, especially with, my background in advertising and marketing too. It's just a natural extension of selling a brand essentially and, building a community around it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I just do it for myself now instead of for, clients, but that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. It does kind of teach you. It's an educational experience as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you can leverage that in so many ways. And in my case, it grew into that. But and you basically learn and understand what works and what doesn't, and it gets you thinking in so many ways. So. Yeah, you had all the better for that. Yeah,
you had mentioned something earlier too, which I find rather fascinating. Is that if you remember back to 2008, 2009, CCP was really kind of behind a stone wall in a way, and I think the blogging community was the first to really start hammering away at that wall, and it's interesting now how open and communication that they are. And I think these additional tools have allowed them to be able to, interact more openly with the community. And obviously, there's been some kind of, sea change at CCP, and I think that's got a lot probably to do with CCP Siegel and some of the new leadership. But I think it's also a testament to the tools available to them as well. I just had a conversation through DM on Twitter with CCP Guard this morning. That would never have happened back in 2009, 2010.
Right.
Because those tools weren't available. So there was really no way for them to instantaneously say, hey, what about this thing? To ask a question and then expect an answer. Within 10, 15 minutes, we wrapped up a conversation and solved the problem.
It's done that. I mean, the wonderful thing about social media and in general, and that's really the thing that fuels my passion. Whether it's Eve or whether it's sci-fi RPG. I mean, whatever the topic or the hobby or the interest that you have is that it basically tears down barriers. It brings people together in a very seamless and natural way of conversation. So, and because of that, it allows developers to easily engage with fans and with the more voluble fans that are out there, and it allows a CCP guard to connect directly with you as an important member of the EVE Online community and have that conversation. And that's really, that's wonderful. That's amazing. And it also allows, even from the outside, it allows them to kind of get a tone and get the feedback, a good idea of how things might be taken and received by the community by the conversation that's going on. So, and that's really that's the benefits of social media. But let me ask you this: what's the current status of Eve? I'm actually curious to know that, and you're probably the best to know that.
You mean the Eve community, or just Eve the game, or?
Well, Eve community, Eve in general. What's Happening with Eve Eve blog banter? Is that still going on? Has that kind of stopped, or because I think what was his name, Dracarm?
Dracarm, yep.
Yeah,
he's in Stay Frosty too with us, and he's taken over the blog banters, and every month he sends out an email to myself and Kirith to ask, and he puts a bullet list together of a few topics that have been sent to him or suggested or that he's come up with, and then we send emails back and forth to each other, kind of debating which one we think might have more merit for that month, and then we decide, and then he sends out the email to everybody, and we still get, say 12 to 20 typically blogs that will run the blog banter every month, so that's still a pretty healthy number, I think. Some get more attention than others, obviously, but which has always been the case. But it's still alive and well, and I think it still serves a good purpose. It gets a focused conversation going, for a few days, which is kind of nice. It's always difficult, and I'm sure you had the same problem of trying to stay with the meta. Where are things kind of headed, and it's hard to predict that a month ahead of time. But
yeah. So what iteration are you at then? Like 70 something?
Yeah, I think we're close to 70. Yeah, or more maybe. I have to check, but it's still going strong. So congratulations on getting that going. I still think it's a brilliant idea. And it also sparks conversation throughout everything else too. A lot of times it gets, one of the posts gets cross-posted to Reddit, or it gets talked about on Twitter, or, we have a conversation over on Tweetfleet Slack, which is a thing. There's a whole community built up, I think over 2,500 people now, or close to 3,000, I think, on Tweetfleet Slack, which is pretty
seriously
impressive. Yeah,
I didn't know about this. This is great.
Yeah, and Tweetfleet Slack is there's a general channel, but then there's also sub channels for everything. I have a sub channel just for creative people who are creating fan art for Eve, and there's podcasting sub channels and a lore sub channel, and it just goes on and on and on. And there's probably ones that I don't even know about, because you can also create private channels and invitation only channels, things like that. So there's a thriving community that goes on just in chat on Slack, which is pretty impressive.
I didn't know this. That's great.
Yeah, and we also get CCP employees dropping in and asking just for about a month or so ago, CCP Fox 4 dropped into the creative channel and said, we're looking for a team logo. Anybody got any ideas? So we had an hour of back and forth with me and a couple other people, and we came up with a logo for their team right there in the creative Slack channel. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
So again, it's that kind of instantaneous, and there's no commitment on their part. It's not like say like in the old days when you had to sit down and think about writing a letter, right? And it took time and effort. You had to sit down and write out a letter, and then you had to mail it, and then wait for a week or two to get a response. It's hysterical when you think back that people actually communicated that way. One of the stories, I was reading a book not too long ago about the old days of sailing ships, and one of the things I found fascinating was one of the chapters. It was a nonfiction.
Okay.
And what it was about doesn't matter, but one of the chapters was actual correspondence that the captain of the ship and his wife had. And, the dates on these letters are hysterical, because there'd be 4 or 5 months between letters.
Each letter, yeah.
Yeah, because he'd send it, and it'd have to go back to Europe, right? And that would take a month, and then it'd have to go on a carriage, and then be taken out. So that might take a couple of weeks, and then she had to oh my gosh, a letter from Dad, and then write back, and then all that has to happen again. It's just weird that now we can do it instantaneously from anywhere in the world, really.
Yeah. It just shows to you as well, like the pace of things and the expectations that we have when, you send out an email these days, and, you're expecting, like an answer within the next hour or so, because
right. Where are they? What has happened to them?
Exactly.
Are they in trouble? Right.
Exactly,
yeah. I haven't heard back from so-and-so.
You start to worry within, a couple of hours, whereas back then, you wouldn't know anything about them, for a few months. So yeah, no, that's
yeah. No, and it's this funny story, a little off this. But it's kind of the same thing. But back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I was in, again, graphic design studios, advertising, marketing. And there was a gentleman who was probably 20, 30 years my senior, and I remember having this conversation with him about how FedEx had ruined advertising. And yeah, because before FedEx, you would do some work and then you would send it off to the client, and especially if they were out of town, you would mail it to them. So there'd be a 3-day buffer or a 2-day buffer before they got what you sent them. And
right.
Then there'd be another 2-day buffer for them to write you back or call you on the phone, or it was this slower pace thing where you had these gaps in between where with FedEx, you'd send stuff out and they'd have it the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
And that was too fast. He was complaining that whole idea of them being able to communicate that quickly was ruining it, because the client relationships, there wasn't enough time to do all the things they'd gotten used to doing.
Yeah, and to think about what to do next and how to position something, because you'd have to have that instantaneous thought process, and because again, the pace has just picked up, but in doing so, it's created a whole new set of opportunities. So I guess you have to see it.
It does have a negative side often, and I think that's where people get into trouble sometimes, and that's where someone like yourself or someone like me who can advise people on the best sort of what do we call that? They have standards they have to stick to, or processes and procedures, especially from a corporate side. And I'm sure that CCP probably has something like that in place as well, because the instantaneousness of it also means that sometimes it's from the seat of your pants, and that's not always the best way to respond to something quickly. Without the time. I mean, when you were composing a letter that was going to take 3 months to get back across the ocean, you took your time picking your words, I would think.
Yeah. The prose, very different from what you have on Twitter or Slack or whatever. So, and again, it's kind of funny that we've seen this happen over the last 10 years with blogging, whereas blogs used to be 400, 500, 600 words. That today to a lot of people seems like way too long. And it's more of a back and forth, small bits of information, a la Twitter.
Right.
That seem to be, but probably we'll kind of see a balance sort itself out where people will want to seek more depth in the conversation that they have and the subjects and that sort of thing, and blogging will still keep that. So maybe people on the fringe, will move away from that, but you'll still have a core of bloggers out there doing that, and you being one of them, and there's a lot of them. I mean, there's still blogs that I read that I've been reading for almost a decade now. So that will still stick around. Have in regards to Eve itself, Eve Online and CCP and whatnot. What's the latest news from this old timer who hasn't had time to keep up?
Well, I think right now, really everything's sort of on. Everything's great. And Eve is better than it's ever been before, and there's no doubt and there's no argument about that, really. But there's still a lot of things that are coming that kind of are in a waiting pattern, and the biggest one is going to be here shortly with Citadels, with players being able to build and construct, small, medium, and extra large, being able to build those kind of structures in space. From a player perspective, is something rather new, and the idea that especially the extra large ones will be able to dock capital ships. So for the first time ever in Eve, those guys who were essentially locked into a Titan will be able to get out and walk around without having to fear losing their ship. So it's kind of a game changer, with everything that's happened with Null Sov, with all the changes that Aegis brought along, and now being able to do that as well. I think that's going to be catastrophic. I mean, in a good way. It's going to shake things up quite a bit, and probably in ways that no one's really sort of anticipated yet. And
Right.
then there's also, for us low sec guys and for, high sec and for null, there's also it's been confirmed pretty much that they're going to be bringing links on grid and getting rid of off grid link boosters. So that is also going to shake things up a little bit. And, a lot of people have been building alts, for a long time now, specifically built to run link ships off grid. Yeah. So that's going to, change things a little bit as well. So how that's going to impact lowsec, I have no idea. And I'm going to be talking with CCP Fozzie here later this afternoon. Probably bring that up as well. So there's a lot of exciting things going on. I think that all of this is sort of in prequel to us being allowed to build our own gates and travel to places that we've never been before. And what all that means, I don't know yet. But I know Siegel, and I know she has a plan in place and a roadmap for taking EVE into the future. So I mean, it's for a game that's been around as long as it has, and we're going on a little over 12 years now. It's kind of exciting that it's still as vital and impactful as it is, and that
and the fact that there's still a lot of it. It's growing in terms of possibilities and opportunities for the old player base and for the new player base. Whereas what you mostly see with MMOs of that age is that slowly they start to lose players and subs, and then they start to merge servers, which would never happen in the case of EVE. But I think that the fact that it's one universe, one server, one storyline, universal to everybody, has kind of protected EVE as an MMO from the typical fate of an MMO.
I think with EVE you have a very unique situation, which probably wasn't appreciated at the time it was built, but perhaps it was. We have a core group of very, very dedicated people who are committed to it long term, and it's stuck around. And it is.
You mean in the community or with the devs, or both?
Just both. I mean, everywhere. The dev from all the way down from CCP all the way down to the players and the community that's built up around it. Right. You see that from how many people go to FanFest, or how many EVE meets there are. There are more EVE meets now than ever. And there's a whole website built just to bring those things together. And and the services that we have as a community have grown. A lot of people are doing a lot of really amazing things in the community that we would never have even imagined just 10 years ago. So a lot of that has kept the community vital and kept it interesting and kept people engaged with it. And I think that the fact that the game is better now than it has been, I think that it hasn't been abandoned. In other words, CCP hasn't stepped back from it. Even with Valkyrie and Gunjack and the VR commitment that they've made, they haven't stepped away from doing anything with EVE, which would have been a signal that this thing is probably going to start slowly dying. So they haven't done that, and so the commitment from them is there as well. So that gives everybody hope that there's a place that we're all going to end up someday. I think that's kept it alive. And we all wish that the subscriber numbers were better, but it's it is the kind of game that's not going to attract a huge following like Warcraft or something, and that's just where it is. And so hopefully it will continue to thrive.
Yeah. So what are the numbers these days?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't pay any attention to that.
Yeah.
I know I've seen the charts, and the charts have been going up lately, so that's all I need to know. There's been an upswing in PCU, which is like the average daily login users and all that stuff.
Okay.
So I take a glance at those, and I see it going up, and I'm happy. So I'm not one of those guys.
I'll go back to the fact that like this design, this technical design that they've early on, decided upon to have this, one universe and all the players playing in this one virtual universe, did a lot in terms of even had impact on on the EVE blogging community and on everything else, being the fan fests and the EVE meets, and because it's all happening within this one universe. And I think that's probably one of the secrets to the success of EVE now it's in its second decade, is that technical decision had an impact on its long-term success, and that still shows. So
I agree. I think that the brilliant decision that somebody made at the very, very beginning, that this was all going to happen in the same place, is the only reason it's still alive today. I mean, I really think that single decision is what kept it going, because everything that we talk about as a community, as bloggers, as anything, is actually happening to everyone.
Yeah.
And there's no, this is on server B and this is on server D or whatever. Whatever you're talking about, whatever story that you're telling, no matter how innocuous or small or whatever it is, happened for real. It is that real Eve is real thing. And I don't know if you know, but CCP just recently bought brand new servers and upgraded the entire server farm. So
yeah, I saw that one dev. Yeah.
So that was not an inconsequential, substantial investment on their part to do that. So
yeah, and I know that back in the days, and I don't know if it's still true, but they were the ones. They were. I think Microsoft was they had a Microsoft solution, and they were the ones, or amongst the few clients of Microsoft, that were pushing the envelope in terms of supercomputing, in terms of like data management and whatnot, which is what Eve is in the end, if you just look at the data. So they were always pushing, and it's had it's allowed them to stay on top of things, and to have bigger and better battles, and more construct for players to play within. So all the better for them and for the community. Whatever happened to the TV show? There was a mention a while back. I think it goes back to when I was still blogging, about a TV show in the works, or they were looking at doing something. Does that ring a bell?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No. The rights to the television show, at last I heard, were with Scott Free Productions, which is Ridley Scott's production house.
Okay.
And that's the last we've heard. That the director of Everest, who is Icelandic, and forgive me, everyone, because I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, but he is also somehow involved in that development. But that's probably a year old news, and at this point, and I don't think there's been any sort of updates or development issued from that. So that's the last we've heard.
Because I'd love to see that. I think I just finished watching The Last Kingdom on Netflix.
Yeah, right.
And I was thinking, we need a sci-fi series of that sort on a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or something.
Yeah. Have you been watching have you been watching The Expanse on Sci-Fi, which is also rather good?
Yeah. I don't have. I wanted to watch the episodes, but I don't. I think it's restricted to the U.S.
Okay. Yeah, that might be true.
Same with. I wanted to watch. I watched the pilot episode of The Men in the High Castle.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Did you see that? That was
yes.
good.
Yep.
But
Philip K. Dick.
Sorry?
Philip K. Dick. He's one of my favorite authors.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but that's not available here in Canada. Prime Video isn't available yet. So
your third world status is really kind of annoy us.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, lots of good stuff happening, and I honestly believe that there is fertile ground for someone to take the essential ideas of Eve and convert that to a fictional universe, and make something special out of it. Whether anyone will do it or not, I mean, that's always a question. But there are, as Hollywood, quote unquote Hollywood, the entertainment industry continues to mine whatever ore that they can get. There's a limited amount of universes that are pre-positioned. And I think Eve is rather unique in that while it has a core constituency, it's not a widely, roundly known entity with the general public. So it doesn't come with a lot of baggage as far as the multitude is concerned. So, it's unlike, when something changes in Marvel Comics, like when they cast African American as Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four movie, there's an uproar because he's always been white, in the comic books. So we don't really have that with Eve.
No.
While the Eve community might be a little taken aback by changes made for an entertainment show, I think we would be more than pleased to know that there's something being done with it at least, and the general public wouldn't know one way or the other.
Right. And like the opportunity for storytelling within the Eve universe is tremendous. It's interesting to see if this Scott's Free project moves along. And
well, we even had contests for that. There were contests for submitting stories that happened to you in real, inside of Eve, so that they could collect them for the specific purpose of doing that show. Right. Yeah, so that they'd have stuff to base it on, which is kind of cool. Where all that is standing right now, I don't know. I know Torfy, the creative director at CCP, is probably the one who's most involved with that sort of thing. But
you need an interview with him.
Yeah, I do, absolutely. Yeah, we had a nice chat at FanFest last year. I was fortunate enough to have lunch with him and have a nice talk about things. He's a really, really nice guy and very, very dedicated to the EVE Online community, which is very refreshing. So, and they all are, honestly. They're all great. They're all very, real people who are very passionate about what they do, which is great. I said this to one of my interviews, that the EVE community reminds me very much of a small town. And CCP seems kind of like the small town, government. Everybody knows sort of everybody, even if you don't know them.
That's true.
If you don't know them personally, you know of them. And sort of the mayor and the fire chief and the sheriff and then it's all very small and sort of not that small. I mean, it's not like Mayberry, say, but like a relatively small town where everybody kind of knows everybody.
Yeah, and the fact that if you ever leave, when you come back,
they're all happy to see you, right?
Yeah, and if you've been part of part of the story and you've been involved somewhat to some degree, then that camaraderie just rekindles instantly, and it's it's
like you never left, right? And then
exactly.
It's like, well, hey, tell us about the bigger world. What was going on out there? Tell us stories of your travels.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, I went off and I tried this other game and I didn't like it as much, so I came back to Eve. I hear that all the time. Well, a lot of people in Stay Frosty will do that. They'll go off and try something else for a while, and then they're like, yeah, I came back. We just had a couple of guys from Test come back, We went off and tried to join Test Alliance for a while, and they're like, yeah, it's too many rules, too many CTAs, blah, blah, blah. We want to come back and YAR and pirate, so it's always fun.
Yeah. And it feels, as though that you're always, the stories that you've created within Eve and the things that have happened and the friendships that have been the consequences of you getting into this game and playing this game, they are very strong. And whenever you come back, you automatically engage back into those. And I've never had the experiences that I've had either within the game and within the greater context of the social of experience of the game, fan fests and the EVE blogging and whatnot. I've never had that outside of EVE Online. It's been a transformative experience. So
it has for me as well. And building this community and actually having a quote unquote fan base, which is just amazing. I have been humbled and overwhelmed by it constantly, and most recently, and I don't like to timestamp these interviews very much with what's going on, but there's been things that have been happening in my life lately that I've just gotten tremendous support, but it's also been an opportunity to meet so many people and to impact lives, outside of the game as well. I'm doing some work now for Care for Kids, which is a charity in Sweden that's doing a lot of work around the world with children doing long-term hospital stays. By providing access to video games, in particular EVE Online.
Right.
I think that's such a great idea. When I heard about it, and I've done videos, and I just did an illustrated poster that they're auctioning off to raise money, and I'm very pleased to, that's something that I would never even have heard of if it worked.
Had
for
it
the
been
EVE
not
community,
for
right?
Yeah.
No, and it's just amazing. And I think, you and I are a great example. I'll tell you a funny story because I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but I had been reading your blog for a while because 2008 was when I started playing EVE. And
okay.
So I kind of, after I started playing, I knew nothing about the game before I downloaded it and started playing. Never played an MMO before, didn't even really understand fully, what it was. And so I started playing, and I started, Googling it and finding blogs and reading the blogs, and that's when I thought, because I had actually had a few blogs before that. I had a sort of a business related one, and then I had tinkered around a little bit with a personal one, which really never sort of took off or went anywhere. But so I was familiar with it, and I'm like, should I start my own? And I decided to, and the first week. You wrote me an email, and I still have it somewhere because I didn't know what I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, and I wasn't sure that that I really wanted to jump into that pond, as it were. So I was a little bit taken aback, but the email that I got from you was very, very inspiring and encouraged me to continue. And not only did you do that, but you immediately put me on the blog pack. So it was like to me, it was, hey, welcome aboard, welcome to the EVE community, and I'm sort of going to validate you now. And that was really, really encouraging. So it's all your fault, basically.
Wow, that's well, I'm
you probably had no idea that was,
and humbled by the the fact that. And I do get a lot of that. Like there's a lot of people that that started blogging because of the efforts that I've had, and always thanking, and like you were the inspiration, and all that, and it's very humbling, and also the fact that to me it feels as though that I wasn't doing that much. I was basically pulling all these efforts from various people into one in one pot in one room, so that everybody could engage together, and I would let the conversation happen, and conversations would split, and blogs would start going into these directions, and that sort of thing. But so to me it doesn't feel as though I've been that important in building the community, and I think that it shows the involvement and the passion of people playing the game and getting into the community, that it's grown and it's done that well is because of the efforts that have been put in by people like you and like the forefathers, like Winter Blink was even there before I was, and he was blogging about it. I don't know if he's still very present.
He's still active on Twitter and still blogs every once in a while too. So just like Rockweiler too. He was one of my early inspirations as well. And a lot of his sort of attitude about his own brand was sort of the inspiration for creating the sort of the Rixx Javix brand in a way. So that a lot of those ideas come from other people, and I would say the same thing today if someone were to ask me the question or talk about it, and I see myself really as just a facilitator of things. I don't really see myself as anything special, but other than that, I connect dots that sometimes need to be connected, and then just let things happen as they normally would. But all I'm really doing is just connecting those dots.
And from that, like you're basically putting all the right conditions for the seeds to grow. But if the seeds aren't put there by the bloggers and the people and the fans and the players, then nothing's going to grow out of it. So It's a community effort.
It's a community effort, and many times they don't grow. And those are the ones that nobody knows about because nothing ever happened. But not everything that we do or connect, actually turns into something. But most of them do, and enough of them that it makes a difference, I guess. We're certainly not alone. These days it's not a solitary thing. There's a larger community of people who are incredibly passionate about what they're doing, and not just in Eve either. I mean, more a peripheral sort of community that's springing up, and it's quite exciting. It's an exciting time, I think.
So what next for the community? What do you see? Where do you see things going?
Well,
and for even general, I guess.
That's a very good question. I haven't really given that much thought, to be honest. I think that we're sort of the new tools are kind of solidified now. When the communities that have built up around those tools, from TweetFleet, from Slack, from blogging, have sort of kind of settled into their roles. The way I approach blogging these days is a lot different than I did when I first started blogging on Evaganda. And to your point earlier, I think you were talking a little bit about that, about how blogs have become a little bit shorter. Some of these longer essays aren't being read as much, and I've seen that in my own traffic and the way the engagements that happen with people. There's it's sort of more of a today. It's more, instead of trying to complete the thought. Sometimes I only get the thought started and build a cornerstone in the blog, and then continue to have that conversation on Twitter or in the comments or on Slack. So that's kind of a little bit different way of approaching it somewhat. But it's also, communicating through art too. I don't know, all my communication is not always through words, but so that's
a lot of it is through art. Yeah. Great art.
Right. Well, thank you. So it's a lot of that too, and so it's it's just a facility. Again, it's a fulcrum around which a community has been constructed. So in that way, it serves a primary purpose that I can't abandon. As long as I'm in the game, I'm going to be blogging because it's just something it's like a fulcrum around which everything else sort of hovers. So it serves a very good purpose for that.
Yeah, and in a way, it allows, in my case it did, but it allows for you to put your thoughts together on something that you've been thinking of, and put all that into one place. And as you said, out of that will either grow conversations within your blog, but most often, and those conversations will be spread out on other social platforms, but at least that seed of your thoughts is there, for anybody to come back and to easily come across it on your blog versus on Twitter, which would makes no sense. You don't scroll back in terms of like tweets, past tweets. It's more of a live conversation, but that idea needs to rest and needs to sit somewhere, and I think blogs will do that. It's going to be funny when if Twitter ever expands.
I was just going to ask you about that. What your thoughts are? What kind of impact would that have? I don't know exactly. The unique thing about Twitter is that it's a rolling conversation, and I've described it that way to people who are new to it or trying to get their handle on it. You have to understand it's like waves that come in on the shore, right? Those waves, they hit and they roll up onto the beach, but they're gone forever after that. And it's kind of the way I look at the conversation. You have to stay with the roll or get off and come back later. It's not a permanent sort of thing. I mean, every once in a while I'll get a like for a tweet that I did like 300 days ago. It's always very strange to me. Like,
it's always
where did those people they digging that far back into my conversation? But
I
don't know. Well, I don't know what impact that would have, if it would even serve Twitter at all, any sort of purpose to have 16,000 words on a tweet.
I think that I understand the business sense of it. From the fact that they are trying to keep the conversation and the eyeballs within within Twitter, because what they've noticed is that a lot of articles are being written and essays are being written, and they'll just put a tease and a link in a tweet, and people will leave and have that conversation on that other social network, be it a blog or Facebook or whatnot. I think that it will provide more ability for conversation, but I still think that a blog is much more, if you go back to your analogy of the beach and of the waves, well, to me, a blog is more like, it's more like a book with chapters, and you can easily go back and, easily, tag those chapters on topics, on subjects, on, how-tos and tips and that sort of thing, and then you can roam through those much more easily than you would with a tweet. So, I think blogs will still be there. I think that, when blogs were the only thing, well, of course, everybody was there. And then, these other social networks came along and these other platforms, and, now, Slack being, I guess, the latest in a slew of social networks, and they each serve their purpose. And I think, to me, the blog will always be central, because you can always go back to, as you said, it's much more natural to see a comment on an old post than a like or a retweet on a very old tweet. It feels more natural, and sometimes the conversation will pick up again, and you can have that in your comments and jump back into the topic that you wrote 6 months or a year ago. So I think that it evolved, and that's good. But the fact that you're now past the 70 mark for the Eve blog benters, and that it's still going on, and you still have a core of people doing it, I mean that there's value there, and there's an opportunity for conversation that's still valuable to a lot of people. And I'd be curious to see in terms of the comments how that there's probably a lot more people reading those and commenting than there are people participating, and it's always been like that. But it's still there, so I think it will still continue. So
I agree. I think that you still need a headquarters, and I think that you still need a repository of thought, and that Twitter is probably too transient to serve that purpose. I don't see how that could possibly happen. I'm not against the expansion of tweets, by the way. I think that might have some. That might have some purpose for certain types of communication, but I think, again, whether it's the corporate website, whether it's the About page, or whether it's a WordPress blog or a Blogger Plays, or there has to be a repository of knowledge. And that repository, whether it's a blog or, like I said, a website, but it has to exist somewhere. There has to be a place where you can go for that knowledge and for the archive of information and the flow of that information. So blogs certainly serve a purpose. They're not the only thing, but I don't see them going away anytime soon.
No, and you have to keep the fort, because though I may not be playing Eve, I'm still keeping an eye on it, and you never know when I'll be jumping back into the conversation and taking my place on the throne of the BlogFather.
Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of creepy. You're going to be out there looking on my shoulder all the time. That's pretty good. So that'll be fine. I don't mind. I don't know who would start this conversation. I had the feeling that I was being interrupted by there. So, but that's good. That's good. It's not supposed to be in any way. Anyway. I felt like we had a great conversation, and I really appreciate you being on. That means a great deal to me. You've been quite an important person in the EV and in my own participation in the community, sort of inspired by your by your work in the blog community, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Thanks.
Well, I mean, it's a pleasure, and hopefully I'll have the chance to be back. It's a great honor to be here, and I always enjoy our conversation on Twitter and our retweets and whatnot. And it's always fun to do that. And I think it's a good time for us to put an end to this conversation, because you were sounding as if you were about to lose your voice there a couple of times. I think.
Yeah, no, man, it's been going in and out today. We've had some really strange weather, and I'm having a sinus problem all of a sudden, which wasn't there when we started talking. So it's just developed during this conversation, which is kind of concerning to me. I don't really want to get sick. So, and I've got Fozzie to talk to later. So I'm going to have to do something about this. But
milk, warm milk, and honey.
Yeah, that'll do it. You're Canadian. You just should know the answer to that, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot,
Thank you,
Rixx,
sir.
for having me on board. It's been a pleasure, and I'll be looking forward to listening to your new podcast.
Excellent. Thank you. Take care, man.
Cheers, Mary.
Cheers.
Bye.